Releasing Trauma is sponsored by the Global Association for Trauma Recovery. The Global Association for Trauma Recovery is a social impact organization serving as a resource for survivors and their families, dedicated to facilitating change by spreading trauma-related awareness and thus creating a more trauma-informed world. Learn more at gaftr.org. Welcome to Releasing Trauma, a Survivor's Podcast. I am your host, Tracy Osborne. I am a survivor of emotional bullying, rape, sexual assault, domestic abuse, and grief. After losing my husband in 2019, I set off on a new adventure to help other women release their trauma and create a life they can cherish. Each week, I will feature a guest expert or a survivor to share their stories, tips, wisdom, and more. The goal is so that you can take away even just the smallest nugget of information you can use in your life right now to make a change, and to remind you that you're not alone. There is life after trauma, and you can move from victim to thriver and create a life you can cherish. Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. I am your host, Tracy Osborne. With me today is Jeff Romig, and we are going to be talking about that really hard to talk about topic of suicide. So Jeff, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Tracy.
Well, I'm excited to have you. Like I said, this is one of those topics that people just really like to keep hush-hush and don't really want to talk about for various reasons. So I'm always glad when I can get a guest on that's open and willing to talk about it, because it's so important.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And, I think we've made major strides with talking about mental health in general over the past couple decades, but suicide and suicidal ideation specifically, it's so hard for people to talk about, but the reality is, especially if you're experiencing suicidal ideation, that trapping those thoughts in your mind just makes them more and more poisonous. So
yeah, absolutely. Well, before we dive into the topic, why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about you?
Cool. So I am 43. I live in Atlanta, Georgia, and have spent most of my life in the Southeast. I am a writer and storyteller and nonprofit fundraiser. Started my career in journalism and then have bounced back and forth between nonprofit and progressive politics over the past 15 years or so. And when I was 18, my dad died by suicide. And so during the pandemic, during quarantine, I decided to tell my own story to observe the 25th anniversary of his death, which was this past February. And so wrote a memoir for suicide prevention with the goal of sharing my story with hopes that people who also struggle can connect with it and connect to their own stories. My hope is that by helping people connect to the people, passions, and experiences that bring them joy, they can stay alive in their darkest moments. And so that's me and kind of what I'm working on right now.
Well, that's a lot to be working on. First of all, I'm so sorry for the loss of your father. I know it's been a while, but I also know that pain never truly goes away. I lost my dad in 2008. So the pain just never truly goes away. But thank you so much for the work that you're doing, and, giving people a place to talk about their stories and their troubles and their traumas. It's definitely needed now. Like you mentioned earlier, we've made great strides in the topic of mental health over the past couple decades, but there's so far to go still. What is it that you see in your work around mental health, around suicide, that really makes it such a taboo subject?
I think there's just this idea that you're if you think about suicide, you're crazy. Or if that you lost a family member to suicide, you know, crazy is in your blood. But I think it's just so much more complex than that. And I think we know now. I mean, my dad died in 1996, and things were obviously very different in the 90s, especially for his generation. Getting help or talking about things weren't, what they did, especially men. And having, I believe, inherited the same anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation that he struggled with. And, I've been managing my diagnoses for 20 years with meds, with therapy. And he never had any of that. And so I think it's, it it's just really hard to deal with. And I don't think enough people understand that. So, different things, but especially body chemistry and, mental makeup and all those things can lead to, to suicidal ideation and having suicidal thoughts. And, but it's that inability to talk or to create space to talk that I think only exacerbates the problem. And so, but I think people just, I think we're still, even though we have made strides, it stays taboo because you get in this kind of myopic space where you're worried if you share, then someone's going to take you to a, mental hospital, or,
Right.
or, totally overreact and overblow the situation. And I think a lot of people don't know what to do when others start talking about suicide. And so I think the people who think about suicide, who may understand their own, kind of thought processes and know that they're okay, but they just need to talk. I think sometimes they don't talk because they worry about how the other person's going to react, right? And so it's and then people just stay quiet. But that's definitely what I'm trying to do with my book, which is called Don't Fucking Kill Yourself. And then my podcast, which is called Suicide Survivor Stories podcast, is just start more of a conversation around suicide, around suicidal ideation, with the idea that, the more people share, the more we can change the stigma around the conversation, and, give those people who are in danger by not sharing a safer space to do just that.
I think from the perspective of somebody looking in on someone who has suicidal ideation, I think you touched on it. They just don't know what to do or how to react, how to talk to them. And I know that so many people are afraid that they even say the word suicide, it's going to trigger them to go ahead and do it.
Right.
Excuse me, which, is not the case generally. And suicidal ideation doesn't necessarily mean that they're actually going to do it.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, they may have thoughts of it and that kind of thing, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to act out on it. One of the things that I have found, because for me, for a long time, I always thought that suicide was a cop-out. It was the coward's way out, and it wasn't until I started doing the trauma work and getting into this field that I really understood just how wrong I was. And it's not, it's not that they're taking the easy way out. It's just that they're hurting so much, they don't know how else to stop the pain.
Yeah, and I think that they're upside down in their thinking, from the standpoint of the longer you think about things and don't talk about them, the more those ideas can seem logical.
Mm-hmm.
uh, that changes once you let them out of your mouth and hear them being said out loud, especially to another person. um, my dad, for instance, he left us suicide letters, and I spent a lot of time with that letter as I wrote my book last year. And it's he thought he was doing what he could do to like take care of us financially. And you know so it's almost like he felt like he was doing what was best for us, and it all in this kind of
Right.
unselfish way. But it was just, so it was very logical to him because his brain wasn't working properly, right, through his mental illness. And so um it's, our minds can manipulate us to such a degree when the only thing we have is what's inside our head, without putting that out there to somebody else to get perspective on what we're thinking. um it's very flawed. And I've been sober for almost 4 years, and one of the things we talk about in AA is like, that's part of why we have sponsors, is so that when we talk about the things that we're stressed about or thinking about doing or whatever, we're getting somebody's perspective on it that isn't us, because we're all so self-absorbed, and we only see it from our perspective. And the longer we go without talking to other people about our own ideas, the more they seem like good ideas. And that is across the spectrum, not just with something as final as suicide.
Right.
um but the more that we do talk, whether it's with a professional or with a friend, or from a sobriety standpoint with a sponsor, um the more perspective we get on ourselves, and we begin to see our own patterns, and therefore can more proactively deal with how our own brains work.
Right. So first of all, congratulations on the 4 years of sobriety.
Thank you.
What are, some of the things that you have seen, where, people can really, what's the way I want to phrase this? I guess just reach out and talk to somebody. They know that somebody's struggling. They may not know if they are having suicidal thoughts, and they want to reach out, and they want to see, how can they approach that?
For me, I think that I think first and foremost, you have to know, as someone who's reaching out, that like there isn't a right way, and the best thing you can do is just be kind and be genuine. And don't say things like I understand, if you don't. If you have a very similar experience, that's one thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I think they sort of trip over themselves with good intentions, when really what most people just need is to know that someone is there, and then be given the opening to kind of um, move forward with that conversation. It can't, as the person reaching out to provide support, like it can't be about you. Like you've got to meet them on their own terms, and be okay if they don't want to talk. And because again, it's that when you're in your head around um loneliness or depression or disconnection, or the things that lead us to suicidal ideation, or to those, that part of us to get triggered. um just the reinforcement that there is someone there and they made themselves available, like that's the most important thing. It's not really what you say or don't say. It's just that you presented yourself as someone who cares and someone who's willing to listen. Talk less, listen more.
Right.
and don't take, just don't take anything personally. You just can't make it about yourself at all. Because if the person you're reaching out to, sometimes is looking for an excuse to not take help, right? Like they want to keep themselves isolated. And so, just coming to that conversation with as much kindness and grace, and selflessness as possible is, I think, where you can be most effective.
I agree, absolutely. And, definitely come to that space without judgment,
Yeah,
because I think, and I don't know this for a fact, but I think that a lot of people who are in that dark place have a fear of being judged if they talk to somebody.
yeah.
And and that's just what I've picked up on from my work as a crisis counselor and that kind of thing. So you definitely want to make sure that there's no judgment. So what are some of the someone comes to you and they open up and they're honest and they say, I'm really having thoughts of hurting myself, or I'm having thoughts of killing myself, and I need to get help. What do we do?
I mean, for me, I try to send them to professional resources just to make sure they know that they have them, and then also let them know that they have a friend. It's sort of that combination of, first and foremost, like, I'm here to listen, and here to be a support, but then but I'm, being clear, I'm not a professional, and if you need professional resources, then here are some professional resources, because I think it is, there's not a one size fits all. It's some people looking for a friend being met with professional resources may rub them the wrong way, but someone who is in danger may need more than you as a friend can can offer. So, but if they're reaching out, that's a good sign. And so I think it's just listening. And I mean, there are great trainings like the QPR training that you can take, to sort of prepare yourself more if you find yourself in spaces where people are coming to you consistently. But I think it's that's where really listening comes in, and not having your own agenda, and just being able to hear what they're saying, let them know that they're not alone, that they have what they have in life. You can reiterate to them things that you see as good about them that they may be disregarding. But I definitely think it's about knowing that person and treating them the way that you've observed that they need to be, to be sort of loved in that moment and in that space.
I agree, absolutely. And just doing whatever it takes to help them get the help that they need. Like you said, whether it's just being a listening ear or a shoulder to cry on, or helping them to find a professional to talk with, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And and something too, for those who are suicide survivors, I think one of the biggest things that people can do when talking with somebody who has just lost someone to suicide is not saying things like, well, at least they don't hurt anymore, or at least they're in a better place. I don't think that helps.
No,
I know it comes from a place of love, and it's coming from a place of caring, but it really sucks.
yeah. No, It does, and I think that's
You
where
know?
you come to, as the person who's lost someone to suicide, like you almost just have to give your own grace as best as you can,
Yes.
because you know no matter how many people do it right, there are going to be people who are trying their best but doing it wrong, and so I think you end up just giving grace outwardly. um, but yes, for people who are listening that may find themselves in that position, it's again just being there, listening, um, kind of reading the room on the cues for what they need, whether
Right.
it's, you know, they want you to remember their loved one as best as you can, or give them the space to remember them. um but yeah, I mean, definitely less is more in those situations, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Jeff, we're coming up on the holidays, and this is a really hard time of year for a lot of people. And I think this is typically when we see a lot more suicides. Um, so, what are some tips that you have for people who are out there, um, who are dreading the holidays and you know wondering if they're going to make it through?
Yeah, and I think this year we're coming at it even differently, because last year so many people's holiday routines were different because of the pandemic, and
Right.
this year we're kind of getting um back to whatever degree, to the things that we did with family and friends in 2019. And so, I think it's you really just have to take it day by day, and make sure that, I mean, the three things that are kind of the tools that I talk about in my book, because the book is definitely a memoir, not a self-help book. And my goal there is to sort of share a couple things that help me, and then I think in general we're all kind of contributing to a collective toolbox that we can learn from each other. And so, the three things that I talk about are, um, share in general, share how you're feeling from a mental health standpoint, share about suicidal ideation if that's what you're experiencing, with people you trust. Um and then the second thing is connect with those people, passions, and experiences that bring you joy. I mean, I think that now is a time of the year where we see family and we connect with traditions and things like that, they're usually, I mean, I know for a lot of people there, that comes with baggage and complexity, but there are also some roots in happiness, that come in these holiday times, that we can, that help us remember what's possible. And I think that's the thing when we are, you know typically with suicide, it comes down to you by yourself in a moment deciding if you're going to stay alive or not. And for me, it's the perspective that I can give myself by connecting with those memories of people, passions, and experiences, and thinking about what's possible. For me, I can find hope in those, in that perspective that those moments and memories give me. And in that, key moment, when you have, even if you're at the point of you've made a plan and you're ready to carry it out, I think there's still space to connect, and and stop and make a different choice. And that leads to my last thing, which is sort of my mantra and the name of the book, which is don't fucking kill yourself. And I think
Right.
at the end of the day, it comes down to that. Because if you're at that moment, and and you've designed a method and that's what you're going to do, you know that's the last kind of line of defense. And I've obviously been asked a lot why I named the book that. And about 10 years ago, someone asked me if I could only say one more thing to my dad, what would I say? And that was my answer. And It's not intended to be, glib or edgy or anything. It's just that serious. And, if 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 you can say that to others, and if you're struggling, you can say that to yourself, then, for me, those are the three things, as a general rule, day to day, just position yourself to share, whether that's in therapy or with a friend or even on social media. And then, make it a point to connect with those people, passions, and experiences through memory as much as you can, and find hope and light through those good memories, because if they've happened before, then they're possible again. And then, as that last line of defense, just that mantra of, don't fucking kill yourself.
Yeah. And I love the title of the book. I think it's great.
Thank you.
I want to toss out a couple things, listeners, for those of you, if you or somebody is having these thoughts, feeling in a crisis, you just don't really know where to turn. There's a couple numbers that I want to give you. First is for the crisis text line. This is a free service that you can use. You text just hello to 741-741, and a trained crisis counselor will be there to talk to you. They are there. They're great. You may have to experience a little bit of a wait sometimes, especially this time of year. It gets crazy on the text lines, but just, hang in there and somebody will be there with you to talk to you. The other number I want to give you is the National Suicide Prevention Hotline. And that is 1-800-273-8255. That's 1-800-273-8255. And again, I will put those in the show notes as well. Jeff, thank you so much for coming on and talking with me today. This has been wonderful. I really, truly appreciate it.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here. And, I love the concept of your podcast. One of the things I talk about in my book is, society, I guess, teaches us that we're supposed to get over trauma. And the reality is that our trauma is our constant, and we are the variables, and we experience those traumas, through the lens of ourselves as we grow and as we change and potentially experience more trauma. And, I think that, a big message is it's all a journey. We're not supposed to get over our trauma. We're just supposed to process it, proactively as we grow. And if we can get in that mindset, we can tackle our trauma differently, because we're not putting judgment and expectations on ourselves for, I'm not over this yet. My dad's suicide letter is the perfect example of this concept. I have this piece of paper that I held in my hands when I was 18 years old. And, I still have that piece of paper as a 43-year-old. And I read it in a much different way, because I am different 25 years later than I was at 18. But that letter itself has not changed. And that is, a good kind of example of this concept that, we change, but our trauma is the constant. And, we shouldn't judge ourselves or beat ourselves up because we're quote unquote not over something. It's a journey, and we have to interact with our trauma in that way so that we can stay ahead of it and stay healthy.
Absolutely. Well, Jeff, how can our listeners find you online?
So you can visit, sort of the hub is my website, www.suicidesurvivalstories.org. And on that site, you can find about the book, about our podcast and nonprofit, and also other suicide prevention and awareness resources. And then all of our social links are there. So that's the best place. Suicide Survival, stories.org.
Fantastic. And listeners, you know what I'm going to say. I will have all of Jeff's contact information in the show notes, the link to his website, the link to his book and his podcast. Just head over to releasingtraumapodcast.com if you're listening from one of our partner stations. and pull up Jeff's show, and everything will be there right there for you. Well, Jeff, thank you again for coming on. And listeners, as always, thank you for joining in, and we'll talk to you in the next show.